Alone fight. Yeah. At this point, Steve Rogers needs something beyond him. He's not strong enough, he's not smart enough to do what he has to do. Neither's Joshua. Joshua's not enough alone to do what he's called to do what he has to do what he thinks is right. Sure, he can stand up for it, but without something else, he's going to be just like Cap was here in a few seconds and get beat up and lose. But it takes something else. So what is that something else? Let's go ahead and look at a couple passages of Scripture here, and we'll see what that something else is in Joshua 1, 6 through 9. We read starting in verse 6, this is God speaking to Joshua. Be strong and courageous, for you will distribute the land I swore to their fathers to give them as an inheritance. Above all, be strong and very courageous to observe carefully the whole instruction my servant Moses commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, so that you will have success wherever you go. This book of instruction must not depart from your mouth, so you are to meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to observe everything written in it. For then you will prosper and succeed wherever you go. Haven't I commanded you, be strong and courageous? Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. I love this passage. Okay, be strong and courageous. Who doesn't like the idea of being strong and courageous? It sounds like Captain America once he's actually big and strong, right? It's easy to picture him being strong and courageous. God tells him to be strong and courageous. He tells him, do what I've told you to do. And he tells him that he's going to fulfill the promises that he has made. That doesn't sound like stuff that relies on Joshua, though. Like, think about it. What is God telling Joshua to have courage in? He's not saying, be strong and courageous. You're tough. You're strong. The Israelites are going to go in there and do this under their own power. No. God isn't telling Joshua to be confident in his own knowledge or ability. God is telling Joshua to be confident in God and his promises. It's God saying, do you remember what I've said I'm going to do? I'm going to do it. I've proved to you I'm going to do it. And I'm going to use you to lead this people to do what I've promised you. Remember the words that I've told you. Memorize them. Keep those in your heart so that you don't get nervous, that you don't get scared when difficult times come. And I think that's one of these things that, yes, like we should have, this should encourage us too, but how? Like, we're not Joshua. We're not the Israelites. God isn't going to have any of us go and conquer a land with a sword and a shield, running in there all confident. We're not Captain America fighting down Thanos. But we can have confidence in the promises of God. What does that mean, though? What are some of the promises that God has made us? What are some of the things that God has said, do this? Because there was things that, for Joshua, that God had said, hey, go do this thing, and he was just supposed to do it by faith. They were supposed to do things simply because God had said it, but there was also plenty of promises. So what are some promises that God has given us? Well, one, he tells us that he'll always love us. Okay, Romans 8, 38 through 39 tells us that pretty clearly. John 14, 1 through 4 reminds us that once we put our faith in God, we know where we'll get to spend eternity. Psalm 139 tells us that God has a plan for us. He knit us together. He knows us in every detail and in every way. And Jesus says in the greatest commandment, what's the greatest commandment? You guys know it. It's love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself, right? So we see these commands and we see these promises, and we should be able to grab onto those things and have confidence and, be strong and courageous in our own right. But what does that look like? Well, it leads us to be able to stand up for others and for ourselves. And that's what Joshua does here in the next passage we're going to look at. If you look at Joshua 3, 5 through 8, if you have your Bibles open already, it's probably just over on the next page. But we read starting in verse 5, and then we're also going to jump down and read 14 through 17. Joshua told the people, "Consecrate yourselves because the Lord will do wonders among you tomorrow." Then he said to the priests, "Carry the Ark of the Covenant and go on ahead of the people." So they carried the Ark of the Covenant and went ahead of them. Then the Lord spoke to Joshua, "Today I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all of Israel, so they will know that I will be with you just as I was with Moses. Command the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant, when you reach the edge of the waters, stand in the Jordan." Jumping down to verse 14. When the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carried the Ark of the Covenant ahead of the people. Now the Jordan overflows its banks throughout the harvest season. But as soon as the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant reached the Jordan, their feet touched the water at its edge, and the water flowing downstream stood still, rising up in a mass that extended as far as Adam, a city next to Zarethan. The water flowing downstream to the Sea of Arabia, the Dead Sea, was completely cut off. The priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant stood firmly on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan, while all of Israel crossed over on dry ground. I love this passage, because until it happened, Joshua only had the promises of God to go on. He took courage that God was going to do what he said. He took courage in God, not his own ability. How many of you guys have went swimming in a river, or a stream even, smaller river? Yeah. Can you just stand there and stop the water? I've tried. I used to love that show, Avatar, okay? And I wanted to be a waterbender. I wanted to be able to stop the water, but you can't. But God did for the Israelites, and it wasn't under their power. Stopping a river is completely up to God. But Joshua had the faith to do it. He led the people. He had courage, so he led the people to do what only that courage and what only trust in God could allow. What does that look like for us? Again, we're not leading an army. But I remember being in middle school. Y'all are savage sometimes. Not just you, but go to a middle school and there is a lot of nastiness. There's a lot of mean people, right? People are mean and nasty sometimes. And we, by remembering, love your neighbor as yourself, can say that's something God's told me to do, and I'm going to do that. And I'm going to stand up for maybe that person I don't like that much. Maybe it's you standing up to your friends. Maybe you've fallen in with a crowd that, you guys have some bad habits, and maybe you pick on somebody, and maybe it's your time to stand up and have courage and say, guys, this isn't right. We need to stop doing this. And you might be thinking, that's hard. That's difficult. Exactly. That's why it's called courage. That's why God didn't say to Joshua, yeah, roll over and be weak and scared. He said, be strong and courageous. Do the thing that's hard. And this whole idea can be intimidating. I know I forget things easily. There's been times in my life when God has done amazing things. But when the difficult things arise, I don't always remember them well. Who here has forgotten to do their homework, right? If you forget something like that, I'm sure we've forgotten tons of other things. I know there was plenty of times I forgot to do plenty of chores my parents gave me. Yeah, stuff like that, right? If we have this tendency to forget. Hey guys, listen up. We have this tendency to forget. So how can we remember? How can we, in those moments when we have to stand up to somebody, we have to stand up for somebody, how can we remember that God's been faithful to us in the past and that he's going to be faithful again? Well, the Israelites had an interesting way of doing that. Let's go ahead and look at Joshua 4, 20 through 24. starting in verse 20. Then Joshua set up in Gilgal the 12 stones they took from the middle of the Jordan. And he said to the Israelites, "In the future when your children ask their fathers, 'What is the meaning of these stones?' you should tell them. You should tell your children, 'Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground, for the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you had crossed over, just as the Lord your God did at the Red Sea, which he dried up before us until we had crossed over. This is so that all the people of the earth may know that the Lord's hand is mighty, and so that you may always fear the Lord your God.'" So picture this. You're crossing the Red Sea to go to war, and Joshua tells you, "Hey, pick up these big stones and put them in a pile." Obviously, we know it says why he did it, and it might seem weird to us, but think about it. We do stuff like this after wars of our own. Who here's ever been to Washington, D.C.? Okay, there's a lot of monuments there that remind us of what people have done in the past, these wars that have been fought. Not all of them are even related to wars. Some of them are just great people who did great things for this country. That's very similar to what the Israelites are doing here. They're building a monument, and when they see it, they remember what God did for them. I think we can do something similar in our own lives. It's not always, building a statue. I don't know about you guys, but I have no artistic talent whatsoever. When I was in 6th grade, I tried painting a tree, and somebody said, "Is that supposed to be the North Pole?" No, it was supposed to be a tree. When I was in youth group, we did take this passage a little bit pretty seriously after one of the camps that we were at. We went to a camp, we were at a retreat, and again, remember, I'm from a very small town. We had 14 people in the entire senior high youth group that I was in. So we're at this camp, and we're hanging out, we're having a great time, and it was an amazing time. God did amazing things. I think one of my friends got saved. 2 of them made commitments to really follow God anew. They believed in God, but they hadn't been walking as faithfully as they wanted to with him. So in the matter of one weekend, 3 out of 14 people had this amazing time of growing close to the Lord. And we were reading this passage, and we said, why don't we just do something similar to this? So we went into the woods, and we got a rock. And we sanded down one face of it. Once we got back, we took it back with us, and we sanded down one face of it, and we ended up writing on it. The retreat that we were on, the name of the retreat, the dates, and just the words, "God was faithful." And we put that in our youth room. And I tell you what, we talked more about that trip. When new people would come, they would ask us about it. Now, I don't think that Tim or Dave want rocks around this building, but I ended up doing something really similar. I got a smaller rock after I made the decision to come to Liberty, which is where I went to college. And it's a fake rock, but I have it in my car. And every time I look at it, I remember God's faithfulness in that decision and in guiding me to that. Little mementos that you can carry with you, little things that you can remember, that when you see, you can remember the faithfulness of God. So what are some of the standing stone moments that you can make in your life? What are some of the things and ways you can remember the faithfulness of God so that when the time comes, you can be strong and courageous? That's all I have for you guys. We have questions to break up. I don't really know how you guys end up dealing with this, so I'm going to hand it back over to Tim. But thank you, guys.
Appreciate that, Tyler. So we're going to go to our breakout groups. Let's let the girls go first. So 5th grade girls, you're back over here. Bring your chair with you. Bring a chair. 5th grade girls, 6th grade girls, 7th grade girls, 8th grade girls back there. Let's let the girls get where they need to be first.
Did you? I appreciate that. I'm surprised you listened. The little one? Yeah, it's in my
All right. 8th grade guys, let's see, who you going with today? All right, you know where you normally go, right? Mr. Childs, 8th grade boys, you follow Mr. Childs to your regular location.